Ooh, Agile Podcast. We got a very special episode today on Taylorism. Principles of Scientific Management. Old Frederick Winslow Taylor. Harper and Brothers, Publishers, 1913 is the edition we're using for this episode. 1913 for this episode.
That was before my time, right? and Alfonso's too, I imagine.
That was before our time combined.
Exactly, yes, indeed. But this is an exciting episode. It's going to be super exciting to kind of delve deeper into this, and might be even a long one.
This topic, scientific management, Taylorism, changed work places everywhere.
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
And in fact, Peter Drucker named Winslow Taylor as like the father of knowledge workers. It was the first one that really started doing that.
He's definitely the father of management consulting. Like
Yes,
I think undisputed, most certainly. But I'm glad you brought that up because I was ready to go straight in the book. But there probably should have been a period of this podcast where I pull up his wiki and be like, he lived from this period to this period, and he had this education and did this in life. Yeah, I'm not doing any of that. I'm getting straight into his theory, like
People
his
can
body of
look
work.
up stuff. So
No, because when I explain this to people who don't know anything about Taylor, I explain it as the cornerstone / foundation of project management / command and control / the modern MBA is all based on this stuff first. And then there are many, many other developments that are stacked on top of it, but it's this first that everything's stacked on top of. He even says it, I think, near the end of the book, about a lot of people in college or whatever are learning this stuff. Maybe it's not this book. Maybe it was another thing I read. I'm not quite sure about that one, so I'm going to abandon this.
he has, he has some things that look like the manifesto sort of things. I remember, like X over Y, A over B, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, the big thing is that he had been working at a plant before he wrote this book. He started off at 25 as a worker, as a laborer who was, I forgot what it was that they did, but he was a member of what they called the gang, and then eventually he became the gang boss, which was like a team leader, and then he became a supervisor.
Right.
He was very promotable, and a lot of his ideas really took on. And as a member of the gang, he was trying to get the workers to be more productive, and they refused to work. The idea being that if you work faster, they can tell how productive you can be, and so they don't need as many people. Mm-hmm. So they're going to lay somebody off. So they slow down in order that everybody can do it. But he went through a whole bunch of ideas as practice, not just a theoretician or an academician saying, "Oh, this is the way it should be," and this is how people work. He demonstrated a lot of the things that he talked about before he put it into writing. Yeah, and then he presented this and another paper before it in 1903 for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. Yep. Mm-hmm. And what that society had formed only 20 years before, because boiler manufacturers, the guys that made large steam-powered things to heat up water, their products, the boilers, were exploding and killing people.
Yikes.
So they decided we need to get to work to figure out the science behind building boilers so that people aren't dying. Otherwise, the government's going to be on our case. And
the 19th century.
The
late 19th century. We probably should innovate and put some quality in this before someone notices that we're literally killing people.
Well, the biggest one was this factory, in 1890 or something like that killed dozens of people. Yeah, there was a huge boiler, and it just wiped out a bunch of people. But that society of that's what started mechanical engineering. Mm-hmm. So it didn't exist as a field before then. So
just to put the paper, I think of it more as a white paper now, after kind of reading it and talking about it. To put his paper into context, he wrote his paper at a time where, exactly what you're saying, a lot of stuff was just kind of done until they killed somebody, and then they decided, well, we need some standards or a better way of doing things.
Yeah.
And government really didn't understand what they were doing. Like, big surprise. I'm pretty convinced the government doesn't really know the internet exists right now. The American government, anyway. But also, there were no management consultants. Like, people were not studying management. You know what I mean? Management wasn't really. They didn't really know or understand exactly how the work was done. So we're going to get into all that. The last thing I'll say about setting the scene about when this book was written. If you're going to go read this book, if you like stumble across this podcast and say, "Oh, this is interesting. Maybe I'm going to go off and read the Principles of Scientific Management paper and then come back." It's not a very it's like 3 hours and you'll be through the whole thing. It's like not very long. But don't do it without understanding the context of the time. Okay, standardized education was not a thing yet. That's the other disclaimer I'm going to make in this podcast. In parts of the paper, he goes really in depth with his disdain of the working class. I'll briefly touch on some of those.
It's worthy of a mention, at least.
It's worthy of a mention.
Yeah.
I'll briefly touch on those, but he was not raised by people who worked with their hands for a living. Like he even says it in one of the, we'll touch on it in his example. He was not brought up in like a air quotes low status part of society. We'll touch on this in the pig iron example. I know for absolute certain, because he'll say the way we talk to these workers obviously would seem very rough and inelegant as to the way we would talk to an educated worker, air quotes, big old air quotes, educated.
Sure.
Yeah, you. This is classism that you're talking about. You have a disdain for people who are not educated, that maybe the opportunity they had or whatever. The world today is a lot different than it was 100 years ago. We're shortcutting a lot of that in this discussion. Just to, what he was dealing with is equivalent to the world of agile and software development. So we're going to breeze over a lot of stuff. Just get ready.
Fasten your seatbelts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is his main opening thesis. Greatest prosperity can exist only as a result of the greatest possible productivity of the men and the machines in the establishment. I know you're down with that one. Oh, maximum. You can only have maximum prosperity when you have maximum productivity.
Yeah. So first of all, productivity.
He's triggering you right out of the gate.
Oh, definitely.
This
I can
is
feel
his
it.
hook, by the way. This is his hook to get people. But listen, like when I read this, I was like, it's marketing. Like I understand he's trying to hook people to read the book. People that are reading this book are people that own factories, business owners. Business
Managers.
Ownership 100 years ago was a lot. People who are foremen or gang bosses or whatever. People in that position were a lot different than they are now, especially business owners.
Yes, but he also in the introduction says that managers will have to do more work than they were doing at that time. They were going to have to do more thinking about the work that was being done. He says that there's two different ways that most managers deal things. They either leave the worker onto their own devices, as he puts it, or they try to micromanage, basically, is what he's saying, what they do. And so he says that has to change, and managers are going to have to know more about the work that's involved in order to do it.
So this assertion that maximum prosperity requires maximum productivity is interesting, because in his time, the term productivity didn't exist, right? It was globbed on afterwards, but we know what he meant, right? What he meant, because when you look at prosperity, who was being prosperous in his time? It wasn't the workers. So this phrase, maximum prosperity requires maximum productivity, for me at least, it's targeted squarely at the business owners.
Yeah.
Right? These are the people that own the factories, and for them to be more prosperous, they need to squeeze as much as they can out of the workers.
Yeah.
That's basically what he asserted.
I mean, viva la revolution. Like, I'm down for going where you're going. But again, I think after consuming the entire text, I feel this is just his opening statement to draw the business owner into reading this document. Because, again, he's in the management consulting business. He's trying to sell a book. Like, there's a lot more factors involved here. So I feel a lot of people will get hung up on this, just this introduction alone.
Right.
And I want to just zip past this introduction. Sure. So this is his actual process for scientific management. And he gives it in steps, which I've cut far beyond in the book.
You've cut 50 pages.
I've cut a lot of pages in the book to get his actual steps, because he hides the steps in a bunch of fluff to basically be like, this is the greatest system ever. Mm-hmm. And it's the greatest system. And let me tell you also,
the system's great.
Let me tell you about the current system, which sucks. And this is the greatest system. So I cut quite a bit to get to his actual management process, which is the perfection and standardization of the actual methods of the workers, and then the selection of the workers and the training of the workers. That's step 2. The tying of pay to the work and paying the bonuses for more work, and then an equal division of work and responsibility between management and the workers. So, like, I wanted to point out the specifics very early in the video before we started getting into, because I think we're going to get through some examples before we get to his actual process. Right. So this is his 4-step process, and I'm spoiling the whole video for you. Thank you if you came to this video. Well, thanks for coming to the Agile Podcast. All right.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, Alfonso's here. Patel's here. I'm Brian Orlando. Thank you for coming to the Agile Podcast. Taylor's biggest problem he supposes at the beginning of the book is the term that he calls soldiering. There's a lot of text between this and his supporting evidence and all that kind of stuff. Basically what he's saying is, in the current system of management, the management does not know how to actually perform the work. So they don't know what a real day's worth of work looks like. So,
and how productive it can be.
Yeah, how productive a worker could be, obviously under ideal circumstances, but they just don't know. So they're basically at the mercy of the workers, who kind of conspire to decide that, like, oh, on this machine, we're only going to punch out 20 cogs a day. And they kind of set their own limits on what they feel, what the workers feel is a healthy amount per day. And basically he outlines that as the largest threat to business in his era. I'm going to stop there. We can easily go through any of the quotes. 3 reasons. Number 1, if we produced more things with less people, we'd throw more people out of work. That's the number 1 reason that this happens. Number 2, the management doesn't know.
He calls that a fallacy.
Yeah.
He says it's the belief of both workers and management that if they're very productive and very efficient, management's going to cut them out.
Right.
And because there'll be less, I guess, profit or money in which to hire people, and that less people are going to. Right. And he used the case of shoes.
Yeah.
He says that shoes are an example where once they started automating, it brought the cost of the manufacturer became more efficient. They were able to reduce the cost of shoes.
Yeah.
And so more people were able to afford shoes and hire more people rather than the reverse.
Yeah. Because the cost per set of shoes dropped significantly because of better practices and automation and stuff like, air quotes automation, machines involved in work, that the cost per shoe dropped. More people could buy shoes, more people could afford shoes, so more people bought shoes. So it benefited everyone.
And more often.
Benefited everyone. I do have to point out at this point, again, this is why before I read the whole paper, I was pretty sure that Taylorism was the root of all evil. After I read the paper, now I kind of see like it's more of a give and take on both sides. So in the shoes example, which is a great example, his theory was if you're more productive, the market will kind of make up for it. That's I mean, like, I'm super 1,000-foot flyover level discussion about that, but if you can bring the cost of the work down, the cost of the item will come down, and then people will buy it because they can afford it, and the more people that buy it, the more everything makes sense.
It will tend to, as productivity increases, prosperity will grow in the community or the ecosystem.
Yeah,
to be in a larger place.
Yeah, the whole economy. He was kind of taking a system view of the whole economy. Now,
yeah.
I I'll put
Asterisk.
I'll put a little star next to that because I'm. This is, again, 1913. Things were a lot different. So whether that is still relevant or not, I don't know. I'm not trying to make any political statements or whatever. Like, it is what it is.
Well, I would think so. I think that's the whole making the pie larger.
It should.
And he definitely talks about in the introduction that he talks about the things need to be viewed from a system, from all the different things. It's not just isolated things, but yeah.
In this section, the other things that people will ding Taylor on is he was pretty anti. I'm trying to say labor union without using the word union.
Well, no,
like,
he was
like collective or work. He was pretty anti-union because in his time he was like, well, you should figure out how to do the process the best and kind of standardize it so that you have some kind of based on evidence approach to say what work should be done rather than based on a rule of thumb approach. He goes, I have to say honestly, out of his way to say how aggravated he was with rule of thumb approaches. So the workers in one particular factory, without seeing anything outside of their world, outside of their whatever, would just decide like 10 pairs of shoes a day from this machine is enough. Later in the book, he'll go into examples where he tries to measure the exertion of people carrying heavy loads or whatever, like what percentage of your time should be spent fully exerted versus 0% exerted, and he'll talk about formulas and stuff like that. I don't know if I left that in the notes or not, but this kind of leans into it. He's like, well, how are these labor unions deciding that X percentage of utilization of this machine is the proper percentage without wearing people out or just exhausting people mentally or whatever it is, right? And he's kind of pushing back against that. That's basically what he's doing in the section on soldiering, basically pages 13 all the way until 23. He spends 10 pages of his book out of 144 pages talking about how terrible soldiering is in the industry.
Yeah, well, and it's understandable. It's definitely one form of waste. And
waste. Yeah, good. Like, thank you for bringing a modern concept into my...
Well, that's the thing with me. For me, I don't see Taylor as the bad guy. I just think that selected portions of his papers and theories were pushed through management. It was just a way to reinforce the way managers already believed.
Don't jump ahead. We're gonna get to there. That's like the second to the end page. We're gonna get there. Don't worry about it. So he has a frequently asked questions section. I'm probably gonna skip that, honestly. He's talking about where do the principles of scientific management differ from air quotes ordinary management. I've been saying air quotes a lot in my job. Yeah, air quotes. I don't know why.
Air quotes.
And I don't know if he gives a great answer to this. Under ordinary management, necessity of offering workmen a special inducement. Like, I think we should skip to the next session. Like, there should be some kind of initiative and incentive. And in ordinary management, there's really not that. And I don't think he really makes salient points in these 6 pages from 30 to 36. I kind of want to skip this whole section.
Yeah, I think he does a better job in one or two paragraphs in the introduction.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Around page 36, between 36 and 39, he starts throwing out ideas based on what should managers be doing in scientific management versus regular run-of-the-mill management.
Winging it. Intuitive.
It really is at that point. If they don't know how to do the work, like, it's pretty much winging it. Anyway, he gives 3 things. So in scientific management, the managers develop a science for each element of a man's work, which replaces the rule of thumb method. So rather than everyone just kind of learning from whoever they learned it from, you're kind of sharing knowledge in a larger pool and figuring out what works best amongst all of the pool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, rather than the pass down method.
Right. Rather than the pass down method.
Yeah.
And then a second is scientifically select and then train, teach, and develop the workmen. Right. And then number 3, they cooperate with men to ensure that all the work being done is in accordance with the principles of the science that has been developed. I guess number 1, they develop the science. Number 2, they train and teach the science. And number 3, they enact some kind of system that makes sure that everyone is still participating.
Getting buy-in. Getting buy-in from the group.
Yeah.
And
buy-in and enforcement too, to a certain degree, right? You can't do your own thing.
Oh, right.
That's true. Standardization of the work, basically.
And then 4, he says, equal division of the work and responsibility between the management and the workman. One of my first light bulb moments reading the paper was point number 4 here. It's 4 on screen? Yeah, okay, it's right. It says almost an equal division of the work and responsibility between management and the workman. Management take over all work which they are better fitted than the workman, while in the past the workman had to decide how to plan the work and they had the responsibility of doing the work. So now the management splits away the planning of how to do the work and coming up with a scientific method and sponsoring that and pushing it forward. And then all the workmen have to do is participate and perform the work, basically. He's talking about splitting the two. There may be evils inherent in this number 4. But the point here, these 4 steps, like when I read this originally, this is the first thing that kind of started changing my mind about Taylorism. Because I think of my days as I've never been I've never been paid to be a developer. Let's put it that way. I've been a crappy freelance developer, but I have been a QA engineer. And most people who code, in my experience, learn to code by themselves, and then they sit with somebody else to help them develop their practice. Yeah, right. And then there are some guidelines set down by, I don't know, some kind of lead or director of development or something like that kind of like, you got to have, this is our source control process. This is our check-in, check-out process. This is our generally our change control process. This is how you do deployments, stuff like that. Like this is how to get your code on the machines in production.
This is how we indent our code.
Yeah, it could be that. Yeah, it could be
tabs
that.
and spaces.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think what we have to do, though, is bear in mind the context, right? So we're talking about modern knowledge workers, but in his case, that wasn't the frame, right? It was basically assembly type of work, stamping out widgets that was consistent.
Or the raw materials.
Or the raw materials,
shoveling pig iron and carrying bricks from one section to the other. Yeah.
And that work was predictable, right? It was predictable enough to the point where somebody could meter that and say, this is how it's done.
Right.
Let's see you do it. Oh, yeah, that's right. Or that's not right. What I'm saying is it's difficult to draw parallels with knowledge work from that perspective. But then the flip side of that, I'm going to argue both sides today. The flip side of that is it's not that different from somebody pair programming or learning from a senior person, right?
Yeah.
It's not that different.
Yeah.
Well, that part is different from what the type of management he was arguing against versus like what we have today. And the reason why we have it today is because it's our software processes are not defined. People are just winging it.
Yeah.
And for software, although there are a lot more studies and things like that in behavioral psychology and other things like that where we can take things that we can learn from and benefits of pair programming and other things that have been tested.
Yeah.
But most of the work is pretty disorganized, and we're just working on things on a...
Sometimes that flies under the radar of, well, we're being innovative.
Yeah. That's more
autonomy, right?
Yeah, that's more of an R&D department than it is an actual production.
The point of this whole page, like 39, you kind of see it here in this paragraph. The work planned in advance this way constitutes tasks to be solved, as explained above, not by the workman alone, but in almost all cases, a joint effort of all the workmen and the management. So he's kind of throwing out the idea that the management is bringing you what needs to be solved, and then the workers are solving it, aka the how. And I was like, well, this is very clear to me in this paragraph. So,
and it's also it takes one very promoted idea by a lot of management consultants is that you don't want to direct them top down. You want them to develop the consensus, so that it's much easier for them to accept an idea that they came up with rather than trying to push it out.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to kind of what he was talking about earlier, is like you can't throw all the responsibility of all the planning and then doing all the work. You can't throw that all off onto the worker. Part of that responsibility is management's job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Management didn't want to do it.
Oh, well, management
Still doesn't.
Management had no expertise to even participate in that. But again, like the point of what he's saying, well, my opinion anyway, what he's saying in this document is like, no, management has to take an active role in the, like I would say he probably goes a little bit too far when he says in the example that we're about to get into with the Midvale steel, where he's saying that originally they were doing 12.5 long tons per man. I don't know what the difference between a ton and a long ton is. And then, but he calculated that they could do between 47 and 48 long tons. So, the 4 times the productivity per person that they could be doing, he basically calculated. And I left in here. He's when he tells you to pick up a pig and walk, you pick it up and you walk. And when he tells you to sit down and rest, you sit down. And what's more, no back talk. Now, a high-priced man. I don't know why I'm getting real. I don't know why I'm getting super like Southern / Texas.
Because he wasn't Southern.
Now, a high-priced man, he just does what he's told to do, and no back talk. Do you understand that? See, he even says it's rather rough talk, and it's rather rough talk. And indeed, it would be if applied to an educated mechanic or even an intelligent laborer. This would be very rough talk. I cut out a lot in here.
Yeah, well, that's all right.
From his book, where he's like, these are stupid people, and you have to treat them like they're stupid people. I cut out a lot of that because I was like, look, I don't really want this podcast to be about the particular point in time that he was living in,
sure,
where most people had not gone through any kind of public education to any kind of certain level or whatever. Right. That was not the point. The point was he was paying these people, like you even see right here, he was paying these people once they basically... They had somebody following the laborer with a stopwatch and be like, pick up this much. All right, go. Walk faster. Go get to the car. Drop it. Okay. And then click the stopwatch. Okay, walk now and sit down. Click the stopwatch. He even says he was able to pay these people 60% higher wages.
And they still made more money.
Yeah, they made more money because
the company did.
Yeah, the company did because they could move their product faster, but the worker did because they were paid, and he kind of like, I'm not saying he doesn't really hide this in the document, but he doesn't go out of his way to point out the example, but you can basically pretty clearly see 12.5 long tons, again, whatever the long ton is, per day to 47 or 48 long tons per day. That's his example. It's a quadruple productivity for 60% increase in pay. Not 400%.
Yeah, right.
Increase in pay. So he was paying these people a lot more, and that was part of the incentive to get them to come online with his new methods. I bring all this up because I'm not trying to critique with modern standards the era that he was in at the time, right? And I also don't know what his rationale was for only paying them a 60% gain, a 60% gain in their salary for a 400% gain in company profits. I don't know how he got that number. It's not explained in here.
Yeah.
But this example is about his role at the Midvale Steel Company in 1878. It's a large portion of the book, and it rolls straight into his experiences in the Bethlehem Steel Company as well. In the Midvale Steel Company, this is what you started on earlier, Alfonso. You started down the road of how at first he was a worker, and then he got promoted to some kind of supervisor level. Then he was a machine operator or something like that. And then he got promoted to some kind of foreman and then gang boss and whatever is above that, shop foreman or whatever. And he was in this role. And this is the author of the paper. So this is Taylor himself. He was in this role where he was working in these shops, and all these people were his coworkers, and he was working on the machine, and his coworkers would come to him and say, "Hey, you're working too fast," and of course he would say like, "No, I'm fine. Get out of here." And the management promoted him to whatever the next level up, and he had a crew or whatever. And now he goes through, in this example, starting on about page 48, 49, he starts talking about how The men that were under him were at one time his coworkers, so he considered them friends. So now that he's been promoted over them, he has this kind of friendly war with them where he kind of is like trying to get them to move faster, but they won't because they're kind of and again he says on page 50, he says that there are a few foremen indeed who are able to stand up against the combined pressure of all the men. Basically, he's implying like to keep insisting like you guys should work harder. So he's so awesome. So again, we're back to the beginning of the book where he's kind of like marketing himself.
Nerves of steel.
The thing he's pointing out, he's like, oh, well, a normal manager wouldn't be able to do this, but I'm an awesome manager. So here's my like, let me sell you my manager. Buy my book. Buy my book on the internet. But here's a quote right here. He says, owing to the fact that he says he refers to himself not in the first person. I don't know why. Owing to the fact that he, Taylor, is not of working parents, and that the owners of the company, the management of the company, therefore has more confidence in his word than that of the workers. So the owners of the company are like, hey, how come the machines can't produce more than X percent or whatever, can't produce more than this many things a day? And Taylor, in this example, is saying, well, all these developers are all slacking. They're just lazy. They don't want to do. How come I can't meet my sprint goal or sprint commitment? How come you can't meet the commitment that you said, the story points or whatever that you could? Oh, all these developers are really lazy. But in this example, he could get away with that, and he could blame all the workers because his background was not one that came from parents that are. So again, I've tried to get over all the classism things in this book just to get through two examples. Some of them were impossible to get over.
Well,
Yeah.
but that's such a key point.
Yeah.
Back then and today, where because of affinity, people of similar backgrounds, they're going to take the word more often. How is it that a management consultant or a consultant can come in and repeat what the workers have been saying, and now it's like they'll go ahead and buy. Management will agree with what they said.
That's true today too.
It's still today. And when you go to, it's funny, as part of a startup scene, I've been in different places. When startup groups have meetups, all the investors and angel investors, they hang out together. The entrepreneurs, the founders hang out together. The devs hang out together. And they just form their little groups and they talk amongst themselves. When the point of the meeting is to try to meet, I'm a founder, I need to find developers. You should go look for them or meet for VCs. But it's that affinity has more, I guess, subconscious control or a greater degree of effect than other things.
Yeah, they're kind of sabotaging themselves, though.
Well, he does.
What's funny about this, because his thing was, I only got the management to side with me against the workers because they knew I was from their class.
That's exactly
of
it.
people.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'd like to think that like society has evolved since 1913, but I've not.
In IT, I don't.
No.
I think what he just said is still relevant.
I'm looking for evidence to base that assumption on, and I just don't.
Well, it was the same thing before the .com bust. They were saying, the internet changes everything. People are going to do all their shopping online and stuff, and they're still shopping the same way. It's just the catalog is now online.
Yeah.
But they were doing mail order. They were doing calling up 1-800 numbers to order, things like that. It's not that big a leap for them. Trusting the credit card to go across the internet was different, but other than that, it was much the same.
So I'd like to point out, like, this is the first piece of the document where he talks about a timeline. He's in the shop. He's a machine operator. He gets promoted to the next level. He's trying to get the workers to cooperate, to move faster, stuff like that. Okay, 3 years later.
That's a long time to try out ideas and validate them.
Yeah, I was going to say, for people that are like, you've been here for 3 weeks. How come my teams are not collaborating and that I don't have established backlogs and they're not sprinting correctly and doing retrospectives and coming up with ideas between, like, you've been here 3 weeks. What's the holdup?
I got another 2 years and a bit to go. Yeah, right. I know. Seriously, though. right?
Yeah.
You're right. I think the expectations have changed. There's a lot that's changed now. I may be jumping ahead here, but in his day, owners listened to him.
Right.
Today, there's some parallels, as we just said. Owners will not listen to those ideas coming up, bubbling up from the rank and file. They'd rather listen to somebody that they're paying top dollars to because, well, we're paying for this, must be valuable advice, right? At the end of the day, it's the same stuff. That's one side of it. The other side of it, though, is there are smaller companies that typically are smaller that don't have these layers of hierarchy, more like holacracies, right? And they come in and they just say, the owner just says, I know nothing. You guys are the experts, right? You go figure it out. That's turning the whole model on its head. And those companies, for the most part, that what I've seen is they're being successful. And not by, if you draw the line on a graph, that success is like straight up through the roof.
Yeah,
you know,
phenomenal amounts.
It's amazing, right? So in his day, given that they were not knowledge workers, given that it was all manual labor type of things, I mean, where he came from was right. He invented this whole management consulting model, right? And he did what he did in self-interest to a large degree, right? Selling himself, as you said,
right?
Selling his models, right? And it worked. It worked. It almost worked really, really well in the book. The effect that it had wasn't just national, it was international, right? The Soviet Union, for instance.
Oh my God.
Europe, right? But then along came, this was later, along came the Japanese thinkers, and they saw through this and they said, this is flawed. Right, and I'm probably jumping several pages ahead.
You're jumping a couple podcasts, couple podcasts ahead right now.
My bad. Yeah.
We're not going to get to the Deming podcast for I think 2 more years. I think every time I try to read Out of the Crisis, I fall asleep. I don't know.
That was a little taster for podcast to come.
Yeah, I want to have a Deming podcast, and then after the Deming podcast. Then we'll have the podcast on OKRs. But then we'll have done our Taylorism podcast. We'll have done our Deming podcast. And then we can talk about OKRs because I hate me some OKRs. Like, I'm ready to have that podcast, but I want it to be in a manner that is conducive to someone learning something.
Objective? Well, just like you had on this
Objective.
Just like you did here, where you came to a richer appreciation for Taylor's for this particular work, because you said, okay, so he's saying things in here that make sense, and it's not slanted strictly.
Right,
I'll just get those guys, moving.
Like later in the book, we'll get to where my gripes are, and my gripes kind of align with what Taylor thought were going to be his gripes as well. He's like, people are going to take this. Industry's going to take this and they're going to adopt it and they're going to figure that they can shortcut things and they can do things that I specifically told them not to do and they're going to mess it up and here's how they're going to do it. And and then a lot of people did that, and theoretically the education system got involved, which is in and of itself concerned with making money.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that. We were talking about the pig iron example.
Yeah.
So he's talking about 3 years. That's where we were talking about 3 years, and 3 years had gone past, and he's still trying to figure out how to make this work. Also, I skipped in his example that he had the authority at this point to reduce people's pay if they didn't exceed his operational standards of output, and he could fire people. So he's been reducing people's pay punitively and firing people.
The punishment model,
for 3 years.
But he instituted higher pay for these goals that we're doing, for following standards.
Yeah.
And if you're not following, then your pay is going to be reduced. Yeah, so as punitive measure. He's punishing.
That's his original paper was a piece rate system on shop management.
Right.
So his original paper was written based off of what you're talking about now, which is the amount that you output basically determines your pay. And we already talked about it. It's like if you output 4 times, you're only getting 60%. So it's like it's not exactly a linear progression, but it is a progression. The greatest obstacle to harmonious cooperation between the workman and the management is the ignorance of the management as to what really constitutes a proper day's work.
Interesting. They're trying to get product out there.
That's one of his pillars of this whole paper. So after 3 years, I don't know if this is after 3 years or 3 more years previous to his last example, that he figured out that the percentage is 43% under load and 57% without load at all. So
in recovery,
this is his pig iron handler example. Go pick up that pile with your hands of pig iron and carry it to the freight car. And after 3 years that it took him to figure out the optimal amount. Oh no, there it is right there. 1 in 8 men was physically capable of handling that amount per day to what he calls out as the optimum load of 40. What did I just say? 43?
43%, yeah.
43 and 57? 43 57? Yeah. So the amount of load under day for just for their body, for handling things without getting exhausted. So basically his strategy was he would fire the person when they couldn't cut it and get another person in until he had a whole crew of people who could physically sustain the task. Now, in his paper, I think I cut it out of my examples, but he said he would find other places in the organization for those people, but I don't know if that's 100% accurate or not because I have no way to check it. You know what I mean? The historical documents from 1913.
Yeah, how many people can he relegate to the mailroom?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in this because I think the ancient Egyptians worked it out. How many people would it take to move X number of stones up to the pyramid as they were building it? And they had it down. I mean, it wasn't like one person should do X. It was one person does this, and then they move to the back of the line.
Right.
During that time, they're in recovery mode.
Right.
And that's how they managed to keep it, what's the word I'm looking for? Consistent, right? So the whole train was moving at a consistent pace. And they did that, according to the rumors at least, there's no substantiating evidence. They did that day and night.
Yeah.
That's how they were able to manage to get those pyramids built. Quite an awe-inspiring sight.
So yeah, only 1 in 8 men, and then I left a bit of his disdain for the common man in here on page 63.
Piece is striking.
Yeah. Philosophy of the old management. Well, I mean, he goes through again. This is why I left it in here. I left it in here to show you that yes, it was a sign of the times, but I put a little bit of bold in here to say the philosophy of the old management puts the entire responsibility on the workman of planning and of doing the work. That's what he's trying to point out here. But he's saying that the general handler of pig iron, they're not educated people. They don't have any education in management or scientific theories or percentages or mathematics or basic English, possibly. Probably. Even there's, again, it's 1913. Widespread standardization of schools and education and stuff was not a thing yet. So again, this is one of those paragraphs I highlighted it in the notes to remember to talk about it here, to say that it looks like disdain when you read it, and it probably was. It
was, but in the time it was probably true because, to your point, most of those folks that were doing the work were probably not even educated. So you ask them to go plan the work, and you're going to get blank scares, right? So in that setting, maybe it wasn't disdain. Maybe it was just a reflection of reality at the time, compared to today, where knowledge workers, for the most part, are educated.
Right. Well, this is not dealing with knowledge workers. This is dealing with manual laborers.
Right.
But he does say in the intro or other places there that you can't relegate the planning to the workers because they either through lack of training and education are unable to comprehend this stuff, or lack of natural ability.
Right.
But it may also be cultural. There may be immigrants and not speak the language and things like that, so ideas don't flow. But he definitely says there's a class of people who are just not qualified to do the thinking, the knowledge work aspect of it. And so the thing that they're best suited for is manual labor, if they're one of the out of the 8 that they can do it.
Well, he gives you in this between page 69 and page 70, he gives you some elaboration on exactly what you're talking about. It's page 70 is what I'm talking about. If a workman fails to do his task, then a competent teacher should be sent to show him exactly how to do the task. So in the organization, and this helps enact some kind of culture where management and the workers kind of harmoniously are in a culture where it's a culture of learning and cooperation and stuff like that, with the management is like, oh, I don't really understand, or I need some help to figure out how to do this. But, parentheses, with this stuff, he already said early in the document, only 1 in 8 people that I have on the job site are really capable of taking this stuff to the 47 or 48 long tons. Again, whatever a long ton is.
It's 2,000 pounds. I looked it up. It's 2,000.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Per day. So here's what he's saying: we can try to teach you, but there's an element of like a football team. Like I'll tell this people on scrum teams sometimes. I'm like, I can teach you how to throw the ball, and I can teach you how to catch the ball, but I can't teach you how to be fast. You just have to come to the team already being fast.
Yeah.
Okay. I wish I could help you do that, but like that, I don't know how to. One of the things I struggle with on scrum teams is collaboration. Like people who don't want to collaborate, people who are like, just tell me what to work on, and I'll go in my dark hole and I'll just do it. I'm like, no, man, we need more from you. We need you to like work with other people and to like to swarm on things or mob on things or whatever you want to call it. Like, I need you to play well with the rest of the team, to talk about how you would implement things. In an open and collaborative environment. And some people just like they don't want to do that. They're just like, oh, I just want to do it myself.
Problem solving. That's one of the things we're expanding.
Yeah.
Him talking about how management doesn't know how things are done. Management doesn't know how software development is done. Most programmers don't know how software development is done because they don't know the different facets of it. This is one where the worker does not have
kinds of software development. Oh my God.
The software developer doesn't have the natural ability to understand the nature of the work, blah 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 blah. He does it basically by intuition or just having developed the skills and the processes to do problem solving and expressing the solution in a way that for the most part is suitable to a computer to get it to do what he wants it to do. But then breaking down those steps, analyzing them and saying, hey, how can I make this faster? How can I be more accurate in my work?
Yeah. That's
something where, man, you have to go back and start measuring. You have to apply and that's why I'm a fan of the things that he promotes and what it started, but he didn't do it for knowledge work, and so that has to be developed.
Yeah.
But Disney did this for knowledge work, where the work of animators had to be developed. The artists making the knowledge work, combination manual labor.
Yeah.
They knew how to draw, obviously, because they brought them in to do that. Sure. But making drawings that looked like they were moving and that they had real volume, because when you have a character, suppose it's something that represents a character, lines on a page that represent a character, you want it to look like that character, when he's moving, he has weight, so that you can kind of have sympathy for the character. Because if you don't think it's a real character, you're not going to be emotionally attached to it. So that aspect of that training, and Disney was like 10, 15 years after this paper, and the scientific management ideas started taking off, applies there.
I think of them as kind of very similar, because they were both discovering as they were doing the work. You know what I mean? But I could easily see the factory owner who's like, I don't need to discover anything. I know how to do the work. You just pick that pile up and you move it. Like what's to discover? But that simplistic view of management could be applied to anything. It could be applied to programming.
Yeah,
I could easily apply a simplistic. Although I'm being pedantic about it.
Sure.
For the purposes of this discussion, I'd be like, oh, it's just a bunch of It's a bunch of if loops. Why can't you just
How
write
long?
a bunch of if loops?
How hard can it be?
How hard can it be? So like a for until this condition, whatever. Like how hard can it be?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that hard.
I'll show a real example of this.
Ridiculous.
Forget about software. Just like in regular life, in a pizza shop, they had these empty pizza boxes stacked up. People were obviously making the boxes from flats, right? And they would stack them up into a kind of like a hopper.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were taught by leadership, here's how you do it. Here's how you fold a box, and then you put it in, fold another one, put on top of that. And so the eager beavers, they come in and say, we don't have any orders to fulfill now. Go ahead and make boxes, right? Gotta keep them productive.
Yeah.
So they start making boxes, and they did what they were told. And so it got to the point where the pile was so high, they couldn't get those boxes exactly on there, and they were throwing them up like this, right? It's like, okay, the managers are saying this, but then along comes this person who's been working there for a long time, and they go, no, that's not how you do it. That's how we were shown how to do it. And they go, no, watch this. They make a box, they lift up the box pile, and they slide it underneath.
Yeah.
So simple, right?
Right.
But in this example, managers have never done that. They've never got to the point where they had to do it, so they don't know best in all cases.
Not only that, they weren't looking at ways to be more
efficient,
practical, productive about it. It's
Innovative,
just like,
right.
whereas somebody who was thinking about, and that was same thing with Disney. It got to the point where the animators were better artists than he was, so he couldn't tell them how to be better.
He recognized it though.
He said yes, and he said, well, yeah, he acknowledged that he didn't know how to, but he would try to tell them what he wanted, but he couldn't tell them how to do it.
Fantastic. Like he just made a breakthrough right there.
Mm-hmm.
Once his team excelled his skill, like fantastic. Time to sit back, cash in your millions at the bank at that point.
Well, and he also had a training program that he had for the company so that everyone were trained how to be better at the motion and depicting realistic things until it was too realistic. Then they had to dial it back.
I think we're coming to the end of this example. So the example here with the Bethlehem Steel Works, where he's at this point in his career, was somebody came in and offered competition. It starts on page 75. Someone came in and started trying to poach his workers, basically, and the way that they reacted to the poaching of his workers, he was like, well, everyone should react this way to the poaching of workers. And basically he says, whenever someone comes in to poach your workers, you just sit down and tell them, again, this quote is from page 75. You see right here on the screen. Remember, like, at any time in the future, when you're out of a job, you always come right back to us. There'll be for a, quote, high-priced man like you. Again, they're from Texas. I don't know why. But there'll be a job in our gang. I love saying gang. Like, we should get that in the next version. Can I give Jeff Sutherland or whatever his son's name is? Can I give him $100 and buy
every reference to
and
team
buy,
to
buy him a bunch of drinks in the next Scrum conference to be like, change all the things to Scrum team. Change them to gang. I want to see gang. Scrum gang.
Forget
I want
tribes and all that.
I want to see gang in my Scrum document.
We don't want squads. We want gangs.
Yeah, squads. Squads is for losers. I want gangs. Gangs with knives. Knife gangs. Call them knife gangs.
We want to win.
High price
We're
knife
winners
gangs.
here.
Almost basically everyone was doing piecework at the time. Mm-hmm. So for a number of pieces, you got paid a certain for whatever a piece, number of pieces, whatever it is, you got paid a certain amount. So basically, what in this example, and again, I have nothing to back this up, nor really does he have anything to back this up in the document. But I'm going to keep going. He says all these workers who went off to another city to take a job, they all came back to Bethlehem Steel because they said, well, the other workers at the other company, since they were not participating in scientific management, they were resistant to the change that we were trying to implement and the pace that we were trying to work at. So basically, we could not get paid at the higher wage because we had to fall in line with all the other workers who also included management, mm-hmm. and we couldn't make more money because we could be more productive at the other company, making less money per piece than at the other company where we made more money per piece, but we got less pieces because the management and the other workers wouldn't allow us. And this particular example struck me out. This is the exact example of a developer leaves one place where they have real smooth DevOps and check in, check out, and code review processes where they're getting good feedback, and then they go to work some other place and everyone's working on their local machine, and there's not even strong source control or anything, and everyone's just stepping over each other's changes.
There's no documentation.
There's no documentation about anything. I feel this very hard in a development background. I don't even think this this section of the document doesn't even need to be translated at all.
Right.
Every company has differing levels that they're committed to basically what I think of as coding practices. Like CI/CD and DevOps practices, the ease of which that you can check your stuff into source control, check in, check out source control, check back in, get your stuff peer reviewed, get your stuff rolled out to the pipeline or whatever environment you're testing on, and then to actually execute the testing. And I've been in environments where it is just a continuous pipeline. Other environments where none of that is basically streamlined, every single piece in that, what I just outlined, is a terror to deal with.
Every phase.
I got to check my stuff in. Now I got to deal with all these merge conflicts. Now I got to deal with all these other people trying to check in that were working on my stuff at the same time.
The library's been upgraded.
Somebody else upgraded the library. Now, or maybe something I've been working on is deprecated now. I feel once you've worked in a development shop where all this stuff is in place, you would be very suspect of every place you go to interview at to be like, I don't know if I really want to go back to a place where I got to manually deploy my code on 5 different test environments. That's what struck me as this example of what is the price on not having good coding standards and practices.
Well, think of how much you're paying your developers, and consider that. Say that you have only 25% of the time is productive.
Yeah,
I believe it's as low as 10%, and more productivity can be doing. That's the thing that I'm working on. That's what my startup does. Is we're developing tools and processes that will do this sort of thing to help the teams be more productive and continuously improve. So just imagine right now, with a conservative case, 25% of the time is actually productive. 75% of their time is a waste. That's how much it costs.
Yeah.
Combine all the salaries together of all the team members, because that applies to everybody. When the developers are not productive, it slows everybody down.
Right.
So think of that through the whole company. 75% of everyone's pay is waste.
It's huge.
Is waste. Meetings, library issues, incompatibilities, everything contributes. And that's what companies are wasting.
So in the bricklaying example, I condensed the bricklaying example to one page because I thought it was great as a one-pager. His bricklaying example, he really didn't spend a lot of time in the book, 81 to 84, on his bricklaying example. And I thought it was really great for a quick story that made a big impact, because he was saying, well, a lot of tradesmen in this trade, in bricklaying, will oppose any kind of changes to their habits. But he's saying once he taught them a different method of bricklaying, and he gives out some numbers here. Union restricted bricklayers, 275 bricks per day on a city job and 375 on a private job. Again, I cut out. Why should they be more expensive for the city and work slower for the city than on a private job? It makes no sense. And I agree with him. It does make no sense. But what he's trying to say is he's trying to say this line right here: enforced adoption of standards and cooperating with the management to figure out what the standard is. He's reiterating his points from earlier. But the interesting thing down here is this line. He says, workmen will not submit to a more rigid standardization of the number of bricks that they put out in a day, right? Or that they work a number a day, unless they receive extra pay for doing it. So he's starting to tie incentive to productivity. Okay, productivity. I'm not saying efficiency. I'm not using his words anymore. And then he says, management must also see that those who prepare the bricks and the mortar and adjust the scaffolding are as important to have in the process as the actual person laying the bricks. And he says here, under initiative and incentive management, like this would never happen. under the previous method of management, they would never say, well, why am I going to pay somebody to mix the mortar and put it up on the scaffolding for the bricklayer? Why the bricklayer can do that? Why would I pay two people? Yep. And he points that out. He's saying we have to consider new duties and new ways of working that in the past, if we leave it all to the worker, these ideas will never be considered. So, which was super interesting to me when I read this. But I think this is where I started about page 83, 84, about 3/4 through the document. I started really changing. This is where I started really changing my viewpoint on Taylor when I read around this part in the document, because I'm like, wait a minute. If I'm going to equivocate this to software development, he's saying, yeah, you can have a whole team of software engineers with nobody writing requirements, no product people, no scrum masters, no nothing. But if you invest in having somebody that just takes care of preparing the requirements for them, just takes care of communicating through the organization for them, takes these things off of them, a different way of working will emerge, and maybe it might be a lot better. This is where he started blowing my mind.
Yeah, this is actually the turning point, right, in the book, right? Yeah. This is where you start thinking, well, he's not as much of a villain after all. The guy in his time faced headwinds in terms of opposition from unions and what have you, right?
Management.
And we don't have that anymore, right? We don't have that in the modern world. Unions are pretty much gone. So, yeah, I'm with you. When I read the book, it's been a little while for me, but when I read the book, this is around the time when I started thinking, wait, he has a point, right? Yeah. I can relate to it. Mm-hmm. Before that, it was all about, that was then, and we start getting into that whole time-based thing, right? Oh, yeah, but that wasn't knowledge work. But now, around now is when we say, well, at least for me, now I started thinking about it, thinking, this is relevant today. Mm-hmm. It still applies, right? And then it continued from here on, all the way down.
In animation, the animators draw the character and the different drawings, and Walt was trying to have his animators split up the work. You have your best animators, very productive. Well, his best friend, one of his best friends, was actually a partner in the company, Disney Brothers, when it was Disney Brothers at the beginning. And the guy could do like 700 drawings a day, just like super productive. But Walt was trying to get him to adopt a new system. You have, no, just do the key drawings, the main highlighted parts, and then we'll let other artists do the in-between work, and they'll fill in drawing the buttons, the shirt, all the other details that slow you down. But we want the meaty work that shows the motion. That's because that's the part that really sells the drawing. Breaking up animation in that way was a new thing, and it took the artists several years to get into it, unless the new guys, they didn't know the other way to do it, so that it didn't take them that long. But it took them work, because change is hard. In software, I tell companies, listen, you need to hire somebody else who understands the code but is not the programmer. And he needs to be like an internal tech support that explains for the rest of the team how the code works, and can tell them why certain things are problematic and maybe works with the bugs, so that nobody's talking to the programmers. Yeah. The less interaction the programmers have on support issues and the technical writers who are writing down the documents and stuff like that can deal with these other guys, the intermediaries that explain things, rather than the programmers, so that the programmers are doing their high-paying coding work and not sitting in meetings and explaining things, answering emails and other things like that. There are lots of tasks. Like I said, the programmer doesn't know all the different things. But if you get other people who do those things, breaking down a domain problem that a business analyst could do, so that the programmer then has a set of sequence diagrams or flowcharts or something like that that explain it, then you can have, like your guy did, you say, I'll just follow take what you did and code it and just throw it into the software, that sort of thing.
I really want to get to the transformation timeline. I really want to get to his words of warning. I really want to get to that stuff. In his ball bearing example, the women in the ball bearing example, I won't cut it out, but I'll make it like a 10-second thing. They were working 10.5 hours per day with a half a day on Saturday. That was their work week back in the day. So again,
6 days.
Yeah, again, like some of this doesn't translate well to today. But in the end, he went down to 8.5 hours per day, I believe, and he got better inspection when he separated the women that were in the shop. Apparently, the shop was all women. He separated them so that they couldn't talk to each other when they were working during the day, and he broke the day up where they were never working in one continuous segment for more than, I think it was like an hour and 10 or 15 minutes or something like that, and they would go on break for like 10 or 15 minutes and then go back to their work for 8 hours. So that was a period of time that he observed them and applied his scientific magic to figure out. And all they were doing was a visual inspection of ball bearings for bicycles, and that was it. So the main thing about that example is he's showing that like you can be more productive in less time, and you can still pay the people more using his methods. It's probably a good example. It's a very, very straightforward example if you're going to read those pages. I want to roll on to his ideas on the nature of rewards and incentive. This will roll right into his assumptions on human nature. This kind of goes into the next section. So he felt if a reward is to be effective in trying to get people to do more work or do their best work, this is kind of his viewpoint on the matter. He is kind of against profit sharing, which this was actually kind of enlightening to me. And I expected to hate this section of the book, but in the end, I actually saw a lot of wisdom in it, and I still am not sure how I feel about it. But we can walk through it here. So he's saying one of the principal reasons why cooperation and profit sharing, either through selling stock or employees or through dividends on wages, are either ineffective or only mildly effective, he says, because in profit sharing, there's no form of cooperation has been devised with each individual to allow for their individual contributions. So if the three of us are in a company and Ohm goes off on the deep end, works 60 hours a week, and the both of us only work 40 hours a week, at the end of the period, if we're in a profit sharing arrangement, we all get paid equally. That's what he's pointing out here. He's like, well, that's kind of unfair. And if it's transparent to everyone, then people will kind of pull back their efforts and they won't contribute to that. The second piece down here is in the case where the business is not performing, the individuals that are contributing to profit sharing, like they didn't really have a lot of control over those other segments of the business.
Right.
So why
should they suffer?
Why should they suffer? If the profit sharing doesn't turn out, that's a ding against profit sharing, because if the business is not making an appropriate profit, but the individuals did their best, but because of some other reason in the business,
something outside of their control,
they're being punished. Yes, because of something outside of their control. That's what he's pointing out in that section.
He's fairly consistent, because that's what he says is a big problem with regular management in the workplace. The things that they do are outside of their control because it's up to management to get other people that stir the mortar or something like that, so that the bricklayers can be more productive. So that if everything is under their control, they have not quite the multitask, but they have so many things that they have to do. In the theory of constraints, that would increase their workload so that they would become the bottleneck in the system. There's just too many jobs to be done at that work center.
Yeah, the nice thing about this is he also he doesn't really leave it open to interpretation of how he colors his assumptions about human nature. He defines it pretty well on between pages 119 and 123. It's the accurate study of what motivates people has to be rolled into the scientific investigation. His statement on page 123, human nature is such, many of the workmen, if left to themselves, would pay little attention to the written instructions, and then because of that, it's necessary to provide teachers to them, because they would kind of just go with whatever they figure out, whatever they are doing, but they really wouldn't pay attention to what's written down.
Yeah. And do you have any problems with that statement?
Anytime he makes any statements in this book without giving me evidence, I have problems with it. That's why I bring that up. It sounds like you're trying to sell me on your book at that point. Like, please buy my book. Human nature is such that people won't read or seek the best practice to do what they're doing. They'll just kind of muddle through it.
Yeah, I think some of this underscores this whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs and what motivates people, right?
Yeah.
Especially in that era, because largely it wasn't the knowledge era. So it was, to survive, you had to work, and most of the work was quote unquote labor intensive. So the motivation was fairly clear. It was, well, if you didn't work, you don't have the means to survive. So I think from that perspective, what he's saying probably doesn't sit well with me, at least, right? I think today it's different, because today people, like, for example, what's going on right now in our society, a lot of people are just branching out, doing their own thing, becoming quote unquote gig workers, right? Ditching their full-time jobs. Yeah. And a lot of them are even saying, well, I'm okay working part-time. I just make enough to get by, and that's fine, right? What motivates human beings? That is what he's driving at, but he didn't go any further than that. And I don't know, honestly, where Maslow fits in terms of the timeline. Was he after this or before this?
I think it was before. But as far as timeline is concerned, this is before World War II, or post-war economic boom in the U.S. This is even before World War I. So they had the Spanish-American War. Education was not great, and the work environment was not great. I mean, they had child labor, and
that's
his
in
studies.
The book, by the way, child labor is in the book.
Yeah, I know that. Just the document there has like one of the items there about this motivates children for work, and it's just like, okay.
Maslow was not until the 1940s.
Oh, really?
All right.
Wow.
Significantly
Okay.
after this. Significantly after.
Well, not and they also he's dealing specifically with extrinsic.
Motivators.
Right.
Absolutely.
Motivator. So that whole pride of workmanship and stuff like that. He discusses stuff like that, but he doesn't talk about that as being a tool to motivate the workers.
Right. Yep.
But at that point, it was manual laborers. Money was the only thing that they really used to motivate them. The Puritan work ethic was at work here, but it wasn't. It was a cultural thing. But saying that as a worker, you're not going to read the instructions. You're not going to seek out the instruction on your own. I think if you look at Christmas Day or before Christmas Day, when parents have to put together toys or something like that, and even when people have other things, they don't bother reading the manual. And we have an acronym in the computer industry for that, for people that just don't bother reading the manual.
RTFM?
RTFM would be...
Read the fine manual. This is a family show.
Yes. And so he does have a point there. You need to have that instruction that trains them the right way to do it.
He has a section in the book. In this section, he's pointing out how piecework is done. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the only reason I want to highlight this section of the book, I could easily see how this section could be interpreted as silos. Mm-hmm. I could see where this could be taken to the next evolution as silos, because he's saying a machine operator. It doesn't really matter what the piece that the machine operator is producing is for. It could be for a high-class mechanic to use in their trade, right? But it doesn't really matter, because the process of producing it from the machinist in the factory that's producing it should be, again, broken down in his scientific method to the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, the machine operator... Yeah, he kind of outlines it here in 103. The man with the slide rule, familiar with the science of cutting metals, who has never seen this particular work, the particular piece that he's trying to design or create for the highly specialized mechanic down here on page 113. A high-class mechanic who does a different kind of work each day in order to do his job in the quickest time. It doesn't really matter because the person cutting metal is basically doing the same thing over and over and again. I could see this being supported and evolving to siloing because you're trying to say, well, this person's just cutting metal in the exact perfect way they always should cut metal. So it doesn't matter if the requirements are different between what software you're writing. I should be able to do all of the analysis over here and all of the coding here and all the testing here. That's what this section of the book struck me as.
Yeah, he also in the same section says that highly skilled mechanic, even though they are more experienced, highly skilled, they still need a teacher.
Oh yeah,
and for cutting metal too.
And for cutting metal, yeah.
Yes.
So I guess a parallel, just fast forwarding to today's world, might be that if you're in the software development world, does that mean that we shouldn't have reusable code? Do we not have developers try and leverage as much as possible what they've already done, even if it means taking the bulk of it and just polishing it a little? Right. I don't know how that relates to what he was saying, but
I would think that's how you build up a library of code that can be used. Okay, so like for example, a UI is code that is reusable, right? So you have windowing code, things that handle mouse events, stuff like that. When you have types of code that get used lots of different ways in different parts, whether you generalize them or leave them specialized, if it's something that can be used often, the reuse, then that becomes a library that you can turn to instead of taking time to reinvent the wheel, and it becomes an investment on the company's part that they can save a lot of money and future development on just by reusing that existing code.
And standardization too.
It's a standardization, which is part of what the scientific management doctrine is selling. Is you want standardization of work so that anybody who needs to do windowing or file I/O or
log in, log out,
logging,
authentication.
You want to reuse all of those things. Handling banking accounts. You don't want every developer writing, I guess, internal business app to reinvent or to work on his own banking transaction things. You want that as a resource that they can just call in, a library, to handle the details of the account, and they use the numbers for what they're actually working on.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, I think it's a combination in the real world between things that are standardized, that you want the parts that are going to be used for general use and several different types of applications versus a specific use case of an application or a banking app for the teller versus a banking app for a customer, for a private, what do they call it, private accounts. They all have banking software that does different things with the accounts and needs information. So their components are going to be the parts that are siloed, and the work will be too, because someone who's good at breaking down or dealing with a customer, doing customer discovery, that's not something you want all the programmers to do because they don't necessarily have people skills. And you want someone who can figure out the problems that the customer has, the domain in which they're working. They have the subject matter expertise in banking regulations and stuff like that, who can guide the rest of the team or other people on this stuff.
That's kind of why I highlighted this one. From a product management perspective, I want my developers involved in business analysis type tasks, and I want them interviewing customers, and I want them doing that stuff. However, I don't want like 8-9 people involved in initial business intake where we're just really just talking about stuff that may never see the light of day in the development team. So I may split that up and break that up with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 developers or whatever coming to those sessions. But I do want them to gain that skill. I would hope that most definitely when they get to the senior developer level, a certain level in their career, I don't really know what it is. When they get to a certain level in their career, they'll have inherited some of those skills where they basically don't need a BA or any other discovery people to sit with customers and discover what they need. They've learned those skills along the way. You know what I mean? But they learn those skills along the way because they get exposed to those skills via working with other people. You know what I mean? So like as a product manager for me in my specific line of work, I don't know what the balance is. I wish I could give hey, start with this percentage and work your way from there. I have no idea what that percentage is. I don't know at all.
It's somewhere between like 1 and 50.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But it's team specific though, right? It's also situation specific. I mean, what are you building? You know, if you're trying to do something for the military, that's different than it is for something really simple.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, for me, I would the programmer's time is on solving problems or developing the solution that achieves the work that's desired. So that's why I prefer having BAs do that sort of thing, elicit the requirements. I don't know that would have to do it, but certainly breaking down the steps so that a developer can see what sort of interaction is expected, that they can actually code the implementation of the platform that's going to be used and all of that stuff, the databases and all that stuff.
Yeah, I would say like the only difference in the way I typically think about it, this is what like we need a hardcore BA on the program. I really think we do, because I was like, the only difference between a BA and a product manager, number one, is empowerment. But forget about that for a second. It is like, I could say, even if you had an organization that had BAs that were not, air quotes, empowered by the organization, I could see the rule of like, I'm never going to send a BA in to do discovery work without a developer with them, because at that point it becomes the BA is putting work into the system, whatever requirement system you have or whatever. They're putting work into the system, and as the developer works with the customer and the BA works with the customer as well, they're basically putting some kind of structure around that discussion where the takeaways are documented in line with everything they're discovering. And the BA just kind of like helps organize the thought process. Maybe the developer's walking through, what if I do this? What if I do this? What if I do that? You know what I mean? Because most developers that I have ever worked with are more solution oriented than like the BA would attack it of like, what's your business problem? What problem are you trying to accomplish? Developers probably would do that too. But I'm cutting out of this discussion the designer. UX designers specifically have a skill set of driving to what is the quickest, most efficient way to solve your problem.
Right.
Yeah. So they're also very good at the same thing BAs are very good at. They just attack it. They attack it graphically rather than attacking it in written form.
I think involving your devs in conversations with the customer often serves to cut out several loops. The BA would document requirements as such. They go back, questions are asked, they go back. And so over time, you find that you arrive at a place where there's common understanding. You could have arrived at that place much sooner had you involved your devs. Because certain times I've seen in my experience where the devs would say, if you want to do this, you also have to do this. Or in order to do this, we will need to XYZ, right? And this is where I think an astute product owner would encourage bringing the devs in front of the customers. I've seen the opposite case being made. You don't want your devs to talk to customers. Why?
Many times.
Why? Why do you not? Why do you keep that separation?
Many times.
It makes no sense to me.
Many times I've been confronted on, Brian, you're spending too much time with your developers in front of customers. Do you really want the developers? They're not good in front of customers. Shouldn't we have more hands on keyboard? They love that phrase, hands on keyboards. That's that efficiency
measure again.
They love that phrase, hands on keyboards. Yeah, many times. To bring it back to our topic at hand, Taylor handled the topic of how his teaching was done in the following, what I would like to call overhead, or what the lean startup would call
For waste.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here are the positions that he rolled out to make sure. So you have an inspector. Okay? They make sure that the drawings and instructions for doing the work are understood. Okay, that's the inspector. You have a gang boss. Right?
I love that. Tony Soprano's.
I love gang boss. Yeah. They understand the job and that individual machine. Like the best motions, the best things to do on that machine. You have a speed boss to make sure your machines are running at peak, air quotes, efficiency. You have a repair boss to make sure your machines are up and running and they're clean and they're that are maintenance, under maintenance, stuff like that. No. You have a time clerk,
5 S's.
right? They want to make sure that your pay and the time that you punch in and the time you do on each job is exactly there with the stopwatch, making sure that you carry the pig iron to the car in the proper amount of time. You have a route clerk. I don't even really know what a route clerk does. And you have a disciplinarian.
A route clerk's a traffic cop, basically.
He's
just making sure you go from A to B, right?
Or a like air traffic controller sending him to the right place, dispatcher, something like that.
Yeah,
you go into the right place in the shop at the right time or whatever. Yeah. And then you have a disciplinarian, which I have to say, I'm going to stop right here. The disciplinarian is my favorite role out of everything that Taylor outlines. The disciplinarian interviews him meaning the worker, in case the workman gets into any trouble with any of his various bosses. So just like
Matrix organization,
just like Office Space, like you hear from 5 bosses, or in this case 6 or 7 bosses, in case you make any mistake in the speed or how to operate the machine or the product that you're putting out, or if you make an issue with the repair, or if you're not going to the right place, or if you're not doing it in the right time, you have like 7 bosses who can all get you in trouble through the disciplinarian, aka HR. And again, now we're back at the root of my problem with modern HR in the workplace, is that they go back to this nonsense. This is the root of their job. They work for the C-suite or leadership team, whatever it is, and their only job is to be the disciplinarian. Hey, when the management of the company is not happy with your performance, you're going to talk to this person.
Right.
Like, is there not a better job for HR than whatever they were doing in 1913?
Today, there is, right? Back then, of course not, right?
Well, I thought you were going to be like, nope, there's not. Let's move on. Next point.
Next point. No. Today, there is. They should be focused on enablement rather than this whole punishment model, right? You can always fire people because they didn't live up to expectations, and today you can get away with it because you don't have to explain it. They got away with it back then too because they didn't have to explain it, right? People that own the companies just said, "Well, like you, go." Now we bury it in statements like, "Well, we think you're not performing up to expectations," or we found a better way for you to contribute to the organization, aka go to the mailroom or whatever. Just move them out of the way.
Yeah.
So we get away with it. So today, I think a proactive HR person wouldn't be thinking about it from that point of view. They'd be thinking about it from the point of view of build the team, build the right team, and build the team right.
Yeah.
And then they don't have to deal with this. They have to get ahead of that. I'm sure there's a whole ton of this stuff on SHRM's website.
Yeah, SHRM,
when you go.
yeah.
But then let's just fast forward to the reality. How many times have you actually seen that, right?
Never.
Right. So there's the issue. So all these people that come out of, I'll call it HR school, certified HR specialists. They come
HR
out
school.
Like,
that sounds fun.
Yeah, like business school. So they come out and they're like, "Oh, we want to do this. This is the right thing to do, but this organization is not the right place. Maybe I'll do it next time." And it just doesn't happen. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's similar to the problem that he has with management, where he says management needs to adopt scientific methods and, do more planning and get more involved.
Right.
Here, the disciplinarian is not the one, doesn't have training in the scientific method. So he's not the knowledge worker saying this is how we empower or grow this team's effectiveness. So, yeah, this was 1913, and it was like shape up or ship out. That's the basic. Now, he's trying to find. I understand he says that he tries to find decent places for somewhere else for someone who can't handle 47 tons a day,
Right.
A place for them to stay, because obviously if he can do labor something with something else, sure, there's lots of other roles. Disney moved people around too to try to find the right place, but
You said a word there, effectiveness.
Yeah.
Back then, I don't believe that was in common use. I think it was more efficiency based, even
Yeah.
today, for that matter.
Right.
Largely, it's efficiency.
most of the time, yeah.
Volume, right? That's the problem.
And that's theory of constraints. That's the problem that theory of constraint addresses, is that trying to make every work site most efficient is not going to make the entire system efficient.
Yeah.
Yeah, Goldratt was onto something.
In this category of items, I like to harp on disciplinarian because I think it's the roots of modern HR. But again, I don't know anything about HR. My professional job is not in HR. I could easily not know what I'm talking about. Perfectly willing to admit that I don't know what I'm talking about. However, part of where I do know what I'm talking about is the time clerk, the person who's in charge of relating pay to a proper report of written time and the report of times. By the way, in case anyone who's listening or watching or both wants to know, Henry Gantt was an understudy of Frederick Taylor.
That's right.
Came out at the same, yeah.
And Henry Gantt, his takeaway from everything that you're reading here was we're not paying enough time and attention to exactly how much time every single task takes.
In the order.
So we need to know exactly how much time every single task takes so we can put that on a chart, almost as if we can have a time chart of how much every single job takes so we can put them all back to back together to figure out how much the whole project takes. And I'll name the chart after myself, and it'll be a Gantt chart.
But he didn't name it after himself, but other people did that. But
Oh, yeah, they
Unfortunately,
did.
the practical manifestation of the Gantt chart has become more of a, well, you created this, right, 9 months ago, so that's when the project started.
Right.
And look at, you're not delivering to that, right? When the reality is, I couldn't tell you what time I'm going to get home tonight,
Well,
much less 9 months from now.
That's what we touched on. We touched on very, very briefly last episode, and I hope to have another episode where we talk about the human psychology of committing a little bit to something and then being in. If you're in for a penny, in for a pound type of thing, it's like, well, you committed to saying that you could get one tiny little thing done, and then after you told me you can get one tiny little thing done, I threw 15 more things on top of you.
that's the part that teams have to push back and say, okay, if you want this to be added,
Take something away.
you have. There's a give. That's because that's the whole point with the agile.
Yeah.
Right.
Otherwise, it's waterfall. Yeah. Now you can do waterfall. So the distinction I made between waterfall and agile is that you have to design the thing up front, and there are very few changes you can make. You're gonna have to make some changes because you find some things along the way, but the end result is pretty much know what you're going to use it for. For agile, and I don't see this at a lot of organizations. It's most of the stuff looks like it's waterfall, but with agile, the main point is that you're attempting to deliver maximum value that you can within the time period, the sprint, so that if the project stopped right there, you would have value.
Right.
That is completely up in the air what you're going to end up with at the time that you stop. It's like red light, green light, the kids game where somebody's yelling red light, green light, and you don't know where they're going to end up.
Yeah.
If you can imagine waterfall football, where all the plays are planned out in advance, and in the first quarter at 8:40 we're going to be at this line and we're going to have these plays, and this is how and so everything has been designed. That's the mentality a lot of managers have, and you got to keep. I know it's hard. Is try to convincing them that that's not the way the development is going to proceed.
I use the chess model, but I like your waterfall, your football analogy better because you can actually put times on it. But yeah, it's like you're playing chess. You plan out all the moves up front because you don't know what your opponent's going to do.
Exactly.
I can totally see that. Like one of the people in one of these roles, the disciplinarian or whatever the other roles are. Like I've already forgotten all the roles.
They're all bosses.
Gang
That's
boss.
the main thing.
Yeah, your boss. I can totally see that. I'd be like, well, at this other company I was at, it took the team X amount of time to do whatever, and so that we should take that. And we all know to never assume that two teams are the same. Like we all know that, but like again, I feel this stuff is such a cornerstone of management theory that it's all been taken and moved somehow into knowledge work, where it's received by the learner as a given. Mm-hmm. Of like, well, of course. If it takes so much time to develop something at company X, then when I move over to company Y, then I'm jumping ahead to the Deming podcast. One of the Deming concepts was management jumping from company to company is a big problem. Mm-hmm. Because he was like each company has to develop their own management, and you can't have management just like they can't be the free agents of the NFL where they're just jumping from company to company to be like, oh, I was successful in this project, so I'll just jump to this other company. Because you're basically jumping to a whole different team, whole different organization, whole different domain,
whole different product.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Market is
we
different.
See how well it's working in NFL, right?
Yeah.
Not. Right? So same thing. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great analogy.
I think I have to admit the same fault. I don't know. I don't go through HR schools, so I don't know what their beliefs are, what their values are. I want to address the management values, but HR, I think, as you say, with the disciplinarian, they seem to have a very adversarial role. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what their values are, what their beliefs are taught. I can only tell you the end result or the product, the way it manifests. It seems they have an adversarial role because they're trying to push people. I don't know if they feel like they're herding cats or what, but they're trying to. The company has instituted some policy, and please have everyone follow it. And instead of how do humans normally react, and let's make use of that the best way, or turn it to our advantage, right? But in a way that helps the team and the company achieve their goals, what they're trying to do. So that disciplinarian type thing has stuck, that they're just like, how do we protect the company at all costs?
It has.
We're going to get an HR person on the podcast.
We are, because we talk about this all the time, because I really, really, really feel that the role of HR and the role of finance, when it comes to Agile teams, those roles are way dated. There's a lot of things they could be doing to help the teams. The HR person, for example, could be helping. HR could help in a lot of different ways, but hiring and firing, for example, is what you think of when you think of HR, right? Yeah. That's what everyone thinks of. But hiring is fairly straightforward. You go out, you do the work of finding us candidates, you take a first pass vetting based off of what you talk about the team, what they want, and then you bring them in and you kind of shepherd the process along. You help the team understand how to interview. You help the team do the interviews, potentially. You align the company with payrolls equal to the industry and stuff like that. You basically extend the teams, because you probably work for multiple teams. You extend the team's understanding when it comes to hiring and firing practices, payroll practices, and there's probably a bunch of other stuff I'm leaving out. But let me just stop there for a second, because most people that come up through software development, they don't know anything about how to interview people. They don't know anything about what the current proper market rate is for different people, different skill levels.
Otherwise, they'd be demanding more.
That is a level of expertise. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that should be delegated off to someone whose whole career is that expertise. Now, you may come to a point in your career where you, as a team, decide someone is not working for your team. Okay, how does a team deal with that? Well, when I go to community events, I would say, like, how does a Scrum team go about firing someone from the team? Someone they just don't think is pulling their weight, or someone who's just not getting it. I never really ever got a good answer to that. And I kind of realize now is like, well, the reason I never really got a good answer to that is because And well, number one, the Scrum guide doesn't give me a good answer, right? So that's like 50% of people are out right there. Well, the Scrum guide doesn't tell me. I don't know. Then I don't have any suggestions. But the real answer is they don't have anyone surrounding their teams that extends their skill capability into that area. Mm-hmm. And the proper people to extend their capability into that area of how do I deal with somebody who's not living up to the standard? How do I interview new people for that position? How do I go about letting somebody know that like it's this or they're gone from the team or whatever? Those are all skills in the HR skill set.
Absolutely.
You need someone plugged in with the team to help the team deal with those situations. And quite honestly, like in the Taylorism genre here, I don't even know what to call it. The disciplinarian, the way he describes it, they work for the leadership team. And they fire people when they're not cutting it. Okay, they only get involved with like, hey, your gang is telling you that you're not participating in as many knife fights as they're participating in. I don't know. Like I love the word gang. I don't know why.
Productivity is down.
Yeah, knife fighting productivity is down, and you really need to pull your weight until they're being confronted. You're not going to get the disciplinarian involved, and I just think that like that is so stereotypical of the normal HR that people are exposed to. I feel like we wasted like a half an hour just talking about why I have such a problem with disciplinarian as a role. But to try to give a summary to this section, in this section, Taylor tries to outline like these are all the things you need to make your company run in line with his best practices. It probably, maybe it's too many positions. Maybe it's a lot. Honestly, like for a modern work era or whatever, right. It is a lot of positions. The critique of this section would be it's a lot of overhead. Like none of these people are performing work,
but we can automate so much of that.
I don't disagree. I definitely don't disagree. But a lot of those have been replaced with either software systems or time management systems or whatever. Yeah. But the one piece of that, everything I just read, is a disciplinarian has not been replaced. Somebody that when you are not cutting it, someone's going to come yell at you and call you into their office and be like, we got to put you on an improvement plan. That's a very 1913 concept that exists in the current day and time.
Absolutely.
If that's the primary mindset of the HR people, yes. If it is as part of a broader view, so like in dog obedience, that's very important. You want your pets to conform to a certain level of domestication. You give them treats, there's positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. So these days, more emphasis is placed on positive reinforcement to get them behaving more like people, I guess. And then negative when they don't, but you have to have the whole package in order to get the results or the behavior that you're looking for in general. You're training or adapting them, helping them adapt to the expected behaviors and norms that you want. And so, disciplinarian would be too limited a function for them. You want it to be much broader. So, I agree. But this was 1913. The level of comfort, standard of living, and standard of work environment were much less. And he had already addressed some of the positive stuff, but the main motivation was extrinsic, of course. But the other stuff is just like...
I have to say, if we're going by his earlier estimate that only 1 in 8 people are physically capable of doing the work to the level he's talking about, like I could easily see you're going to need somebody whose sole job is to fire people. And be like, look, you're not cutting it like at the level of 47 tons or long tons or whatever. Like you're not cutting it at that level. Like we got to get rid of you. Like,
well, the interviewing process has to be more rigorous. Basically,
like at that point, that's gonna be someone's full-time job to be like, you're just not cutting it. I want to go into the level of like the grind that would have to happen to find the right crew of people. But also, I don't want to because we'll just spend the rest of the podcast talking about that. I would rather move on to a more interesting topic. The final 3 parts of his document that I am really interested in talking about is his timeline that he lays out in the document for transformation. So he's talking about transforming a typical workplace into his scientific management method of working, to transform it to be 3-4 times more productive, paying his workers so much more. You already heard earlier where it took him 3 years to even discover with the workers at Bethlehem Steel or Midvale Steel. I'm not even sure where he was at. Where he was trying even different things when he was the gang boss. Also, love the term gang boss. And he was saying when you insert the system, when you train your workforce in these lessons, the average increase in their daily earnings per man is 35%. So it gives you a number. They're gonna go up by a third in their salary, basically.
For doubling the productivity, he says.
Yeah.
Right?
Or quadrupling it.
Yeah. So
whatever gain.
Within 3 years, it says in this shop, the output is more than double per man and per machine.
Right, 101.
But also, I want to point out that he says slowly through a long series of object lessons, and not as the one videotape that you watch and then you have to sign this document that you watched it and understand what it's telling you.
He's cautioning you that your people are going to get paid 35% more once they go through this process. Hey, buy my book, right? But then he goes into the pacing of it, which he says, this is going to require a complete revolution, a mental attitude and habit. The way we would think about it today is not only the way you think, but the way your actual behavior to be modified. And then he gives on page 131, he says the first few changes that affect workmen should be done exceedingly slowly, and it should be done one at a time. And then he says once you train about a quarter to a third of your people in the new way of working, then you can accelerate the progress of your transformation to start pushing it out to different departments. And the next section we're going to talk about is his words of warning that says if you don't do this. So let's just stick with the optimal way to transform your organization. This is a very interesting read for me. This particular section about between page 100-ish and maybe 134 or so. It was an interesting read because I was like, oh, he's talking about an agile transformation.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's exactly talking about agile transformations, and that's where everyone misses because they're like, oh, well, why don't you just tell us what the practices are, and we'll just do that. Like, and then as an agile coach, I would say, no, that's not the way it works. The way it works is there are practices we try to put in place, and there are standards we try to put in place, but basically your teams have to kind of come into it on their own, and then they feel they own what they've developed, and because they own it, they will continue to develop it. But if I shortcut it and in any tiny way, shape, or form it doesn't work, it's my fault that it didn't work. Yep. And now your teams don't own anything.
Yeah, that didn't work here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. You go in and they go, we tried that before a couple of years ago. It's that agile transformation thing. It doesn't work here.
Yeah, it
We're
doesn't
special.
work.
Yeah. We're non-humans.
Yeah.
There's something else at work.
And he will point that out in the sections that I have down here for words of warning. You see that I've cut from all kinds of places in the document.
Sure.
As early as page 28 in the document, he's saying, sometimes the readers of this paper have mistaken the mechanisms that I'm saying. That you got to get a stopwatch, you got to measure the times. You're mistaking the mechanism for actually the product of what happens when you do this correctly. And he restates this in the document several times. He starts on 28. He reiterates on 128. That's weird. And then he
almost on a daily,
on
on every single page he's giving that warning.
This is so analogous to what's going on today, though, in an agile transformation, right? People say, well, people mistake practices for the word transformation. They go, oh, we have Jira, we're agile. We're doing story points, we must be agile. Right. As opposed to also factoring in that whole mindset thing, which he does touch on.
Yeah.
So this is it rings true for me.
Yeah.
He has a huge section here, which I kept in its entirety because I tried to cut and summarize it, but I couldn't because it was too good by itself. That they could do in a year or two would have been proved in the past to require at least double that time. Because even in his own example, he's doing 3 years before he makes any progress, or maybe not even makes progress before he even comes to a realization of what needs to happen. He works 3 years in one of his examples. So
I'm laughing because this again is analogous to Agile Transformation. People go, "Are we done yet?"
I know.
You've only been doing it for a few months.
So he's talking about not only implementing the processes, but forming a harmony between workmen and management. Unfortunately, the men who in charge of this work did not take the time, trouble to train functional foremen, teachers, foremen/teachers in his speak here, who were fitted to gradually lead and educate the workmen. He's saying they were trying to shortcut it. They were trying to do old style work, just adopting some of the methods that he was doing.
It's funny. He basically says they weaponized my
You're
methods
right. In essence, yeah,
to force certain outcomes and expect the same results. I mean, a lot of books and the certain management fads that come out tell you change is slow and stuff like that.
Right.
But they usually don't say it's going to take 4 years.
No, because they would never sell their product doing that. His words of warning basically are exactly what you guys just pointed out. Once people have worked in this better way of working, they will no longer want to work for, this is in 139, he says, no longer tolerate the type of employer who has their eye on dividends alone. Mm-hmm. So the earlier example with people leaving Bethlehem Steel to work at wherever,
somewhere in Pittsburgh,
somewhere else
in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, he's like, well,
they
didn't have their management theory together in line with what is in this book. So he's saying once employees are trained on this method, they're only going to want to work in high productivity shops. I have a lot of sympathy for that statement of like, once people have worked in shops where they have good check-in procedures, good code reviews, good managers that actually care about their development as an individual developer, tester, whatever, and the systems that they have that are supporting them are very well streamlined to move things along. I could 100% understand, like, I wouldn't want to go back to working in some shop where I had to be in pajama party deployments in the middle of the night, and every time I rolled stuff from one environment to the next, I had to deal with a bunch of merge conflicts and all kinds of nonsense and manual tests once I came from an automated testing shop. I completely understand.
That's human nature, right? We don't want to go back to something that's inferior to what we're experiencing today. So it does make sense.
A more troublesome, friction, not based, but friction-filled environment. We can make work a more pleasant thing, then we wouldn't have a great recession, great resignation.
Yeah.
Right.
I summarized his closing of the whole document, the whole paper.
This is the Taylor Manifesto.
This is the Taylor Manifesto. He says science, not rule of thumb. Harmony, not discord. Cooperation, not individualism. Maximum output in place of restricted output. And the development of each man to his greatest efficiency and prosperity. That's his manifesto right there, which is so strange to see it here interpreted so badly. And then he wraps up his document saying, oh, well, the time is approaching where this type of function is basically going to replace all the ad hoc kind of piecemeal stuff that was happening in the past, and he's trying to sell you his book.
Of course.
But I mean, he makes some points. He's like, for the employers and workmen who adopt it, any particularly for those who adopt it first, elimination of almost all causes for disputes and agreements between workers and management kind of fall, but by the wayside for this, and everyone hits highest productivity and doubling of output in all your factories. And everyone is awesome, and everyone's happy, and we all hug it out, and nobody has problems. That's typical. I buy my management consulting book, but I'm like, the point of the final 140. Once you get to the Taylorism Manifesto, which looks like shockingly like the Agile Manifesto. If someone took inspiration from page 140 and was like, "How can I write this for my modern development?" That's what you would write. You'd be like, "Oh, science." Not everyone figuring things out for themselves. Harmony, not us fighting with management all the time.
Or throwing things over the wall and letting QA handle it.
Exactly. Not documentation, talking to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, personally, I think this is close to an Agile Manifesto, save the last 2 points, because his focus is purely on efficiency. Now, I'm not dinging that, because at that point in time, that was valid, right? It was the industrial age, so it's valid. Today, not so much.
Why isn't it?
Today, the focus, so is it relevant how much code somebody puts out, a team puts out, or is it more relevant how well that code fulfills the product fit, right? So from my perspective, efficiency takes a back seat, as you know, in deference to effectivity. How effective are you being, right?
Right.
So you can write 20 lines of code for all I care, but it's more effective to do that than it is to write like 200 lines of code. I'm not measuring you on volume. But back then, sure, they were stamping out, widgets, right? I mean, so it was valid. He didn't know any better, and he couldn't have.
Okay, so you bring up a very good point. He doesn't address quality, as far as I could tell.
No.
So, and I guess we're not going to handle TQM, so we'll have to address it differently. But 20 years after this, or within 20 years after this, Schuhart at AT&T starts dealing with quality, because bad quality is a major form of waste.
Sure.
So Taylor doesn't address that, but if we included quality into the efficiency, we would use not lines of code written, but we would use debugged lines of code. So we would say the lines of code that actually went into the end product doing what we needed it to do is what we're measuring. So I don't see lines of code as a proper measurement for productivity.
I don't
No,
know.
But-
maybe escape defects or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can really dig into this one super deep and have a completely separate podcast. But as the product person in the discussion, I'm going to rank the stuff in terms of business value delivered. And I could care less about how much time it takes to get to that. But like, I would want to track, because I would want to know if I ever want to do this level of initiative again, I need to know that I need to go through this many rework cycles and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't care about efficiency. I just care about the end state of the product and how we got to here, because I'm just trying to do a forecast for the business.
Yeah. Well, you would need to know the number of cycles or sprints that it took to
Right.
correct things that went wrong. So and so applying the scientific management, I don't know what point we are. If you want to go into how would we apply this to now what's going on.
We're done.
Now? All right. So now let's say that we're doing scientific management and going to combine it with Scrum, so that with Scrum we have the retrospectives, right? So if we've got people with stopwatches and time cards and everything else, they're measuring code produced and backlogs done. We say, okay, well, this amount of code was defective. We need to rework it. How many times did it take to get it right?
Right.
How many lines of code did it? Do we choose a story that was too big in the sprint, that some way that we could have produced the 80% of the value at 5%, 15% of the work, something like that. Now you want to get into being able to measure results and using the retrospective to begin changing your processes in order to improve.
I'm 100% for that. I'm super interested in going that way with this topic. The problem is we're introducing a lot of new elements, because Taylor was not concerned with rework, which we all know now is waste. As early as the 40s with Deming's research, rework is waste. And probably if I dug in before that, you would find that too. I really don't know, 'cause I haven't done the research for that. But for this particular method, with Taylor's research, the world that he was living in was the workmen were the only people that knew how to do the individual work. The management did not know how to do the work at all. It wasn't even like the management were developers in the past who now moved into management. It's just the management just didn't know. When he says management, when he said that's the other thing is difficult because the corporate entities were a lot different in 1913 than they are today. Corporate entities were like a lot of them were just a single person owned the company, and that was it.
Owners, sons of owners,
that
cousins
was it.
of owners.
That was all it was, and they had never done the work before. That's the air quotes management that he was dealing with, which was wholly unable to judge, perform, do whatever with the work. And there is no mention you're right, there's no mention in his book at all about the quality of the work performed, just the pace at which.
Mm-hmm.
So for all we know, his great gains, his 400% gains or whatever, like there could have been a 50% rejection rate for his work. And the other critique of his work is it's very simplistic of you're stacking pig iron into freight cars.
Well, it's pig iron. You're not making the pig iron.
Right.
You're just
Right.
Yeah.
He's not doing anything.
So it's entirely
Right.
different.
Before we end the Taylorism podcast, Taylorism epic.
This was a saga. Huge epic.
The reason I wanted to go through this is to understand the parallels of like what he was outlining in his book in the time that he was outlining it, and then to talk about how it lended itself to modern business management ideas and how that stuff has filtered into software development. Which software development, the continual process of discovery that is software development. When I started the concept for this podcast, this specific subject of the podcast, I was like, nothing that he's doing lends itself to the continuous discovery of new requirements and new ways of doing things that are in the discipline of software development. However, after reading the whole Principles of Scientific Management, I have to say his concept of we need a teacher to be full-time employed. We need, in the bricklayer example, I guess I'm giving my summary now. I think I'm still undecided because the point of what Taylor's trying to say is every job can be broken down to a specific level and put into a checklist. And then you can have a disciplinarian yell at people when they don't follow the checklist, and a time person click your little stopwatch and say you're not moving as fast or whatever. I think that's garbage when it comes to software development. That doesn't work because one developer could work 20 times as fast as another developer, and that's just normal. Okay, if you're going to talk about just vetting people out and like firing people until you find all your developers who can work 20x times, then I guess good luck for you in your organization. You have some serious turnover for years until you find an entire team, and then when you find that entire team, you better pay them 3 times what they can go for Silicon Valley or whatever. To
You've missed the market opportunity by then.
Yeah, you've gone so slow building your team by then.
Well, and you're going for the maximum productivity
well,
as opposed to
well,
if we're not going for maximum productivity and we don't have to pay as much. Maybe that's a good.
This is what he outlines in his document. His document also, again, I come at this from a product perspective. His document also says absolutely nothing about does anyone want to buy our steel? Like, does anyone want like in his Bethlehem steel example, or maybe his Midvale steel? I can't remember. One of his steel examples, he's like, "Oh, we had 80,000 tons of steel and nobody wanted to buy it until a war broke out, and then everyone wanted to buy it." And like in my product brain, I was like, whoa, you just skipped over like, why did you have a product that nobody wanted to buy?
Why did you spend money on labor if you're not interested?
Why did you have a bunch of inefficient laborers when you had a product that nobody wanted to buy? Whoa, stop! I want to know more about that. And he skips over that. So as a product person, there certainly is a lot of gaps in here. It's like we can have the most efficient Yugo factory in the world.
Those are collectibles.
Producing cars that nobody wants to buy. No fault of our own. We had the most efficient Yugo factory, and we were producing cars the fastest that we could. Yeah. At the end of the document, kind of what clenched the whole thing for me was he was saying management should be continually training the team members, and management should be providing to the team members what they need to do their best job possible, right? There should be some science along with the ways of working, and that science should evolve as our business changes. That's his first rule. Second rule is harmony. The third rule is cooperation, not individualism. We should be working as a team, not a bunch of individuals doing their own work. We should be working together and coordinating between the team members. And I glance over this in the document. I go over this. His teams were teams of 4. So he actually put a specific number.
All teams.
Yeah, he put a specific number to his teams. And then the development of each man to his greatest efficiency and prosperity. That kind of lends itself, like the modern equivalent of that is like some kind of continual learning type of process. But again, there's a lot in here that I think, there's a lot in here that I could nitpick at and say these things, like the siloing and we were just building the metal part. It doesn't matter what part it's for. It could be for an engine, it could be for whatever. It doesn't matter. Like there's a lot of things I could pick apart in here, but there's a lot of stuff when you think about it in context, in the proper context, it fits very well into software development. And I only imagine that the reason the bad stuff has survived is just because this stuff has been tied up in the education system and somehow. And as we know, like businesses have interpreted it to do exactly what Taylor says in his words of warning, which is you can't try to get the maximum productivity out of your workers and then not pay them the additional bonuses
or train them
or continually train them and try to just squeeze out of them and have all these repair boss, disciplinarian, stuff like that without equally raising their pay per piece that they produce. And that's the main point in this document. My closing thesis on this is there are further methods of working that outdate this stuff, most certainly. But I expected to find a lot more fault with this document than I did. I found a lot more stuff that people are misinterpreting and causing issues with than I did actual structural problems in his findings.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary, Brian. I mean, I certainly agree with that. Personally for me, when I read the book, even though it's been some time, what I found myself doing is initially looking at it as I progressed through the book, thinking, jeepers, what is this guy on? And then it got to that point around 84, page 83, 84. And as I read more, I'm thinking, okay, I can sympathize with that. I can understand that. And it just carried on like that right to the end. But then I saw that manifesto, if you want to call it that, and I'm thinking, okay, so if that was the status quo back in 1913, we are a long way from there now. I would be very interested to find out how we got here from there. Like, are there any interim checkpoints? And I haven't found all that much, save for some of that stuff that we are going to cover on a subsequent podcast from Deming. There's some work that Peter Drucker did around this as well. So that's I kind of concur with what you're saying. Is I have more of an understanding from the book that he wasn't really at fault necessarily, though it's hindsight, right? For us to look back and go, what was he thinking? Well, put yourself in his shoes, right? How would you have reacted differently? So I certainly empathize with what he's saying. I don't necessarily agree with everything. The other thing I'd say is that there are holes in the book that he skips over so many things, and it leaves the reader to fill in those, and every one of us will fill those in differently. But again, not to fault him for that necessarily. I mean, he wasn't really a professional writer as such, but he did, I'm sure, very well for himself selling his scientific method to so many companies. I know that there's been fallout on the likes of Ford, right? And then the last thing I'll say is again the tyranny of time. So the newer thinking that came out of the Japanese ways of working in manufacturing, they basically looked at this and they just said, no, we're not doing that. We understand why you're suffering now, right? And not necessarily tying a fault to what he said. It's just the way it evolved from the 1913 era up until the car manufacturing, when the big three, I think it was the three, right, in America, started suffering. Four. Right. How would you summarize your thoughts on this?
Well, since I was in animation and other things, I was in animation before I got learned how to code in high school. So I had already been making cartoons. So I'd studied Disney and their process improvement, stuff like that. I didn't look at it from the perspective of process improvement, just of historical things of how the Disney studio works. It wasn't until later when I was doing software development and trying to figure out how to improve my skill level. I was going to the library, reading all these different things. So I started reading about structured programming and stuff like that, because I learned to code on a microcomputer in basic TRS-80 level 2 basic, and then assembler, and learning, so these are techniques to make my code easier, understandable, readable, all of that stuff. And started learning how the importance of those qualities when you're on a team.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, so what else about improving the process can I learn? So I learned about TQM and Deming and the Japanese system and stuff. So I had already become familiar with Taylor, and so I knew a lot of the things being talked about him in the software development field were not correct.
Right.
And it's the same thing with Deming and everyone else, because Schuhart and Deming were not respected in this country,
Right.
but in Japan it took off because they applied the thing,
Right.
and they
Yeah, right.
they adopted. But for me, the learning more about the context in which he was doing and the companies that he worked with, and the fact that it was with the mechanical engineers that he was actually developing a lot of stuff. That part I didn't pay attention to. It was funny because, like I said, I studied these other different things. So I had already looked at ASME, the Society for Mechanical Engineers, and saw the process improvement, but I didn't realize that Taylor had worked through there.
It was called
So-
something different before then,
Yeah.
and then they became ASME.
Yeah. I'm glad to see that others agree that more blame is assigned to him than should have been, that his ideas were more weaponized than they were adopted. But I had already learned that, like I said, with Deming and Schuhart and Goldratt and others, that certain ideas are taken out of context or misinterpreted and stuff like that. So I'm happy to get confirmation or agreement, that consensus that's not his fault, and he specifically warned because he had tried teaching people and he got pushback, and so he said, "Okay, you guys are gonna have problems with this."
I didn't really take into this podcast any of the critique of his methods and how, like, I said at the beginning of the podcast, like, I cut out a lot of his, like, disdain for the working class and all that. I cut all that out because I just want to talk about his theory and his approach and how it can be applied to what we're engaged with, specifically the field that we're engaged with. Where it seems very slim, but I don't know. I feel it travels to a lot of different professions and career paths and stuff like that. Honestly, I feel it travels really well in software development too. This is kind of our summary, or all talk about summary.
Collective, yeah.
In his bricklaying example, probably gives it's the shortest example in his book. And he probably gives the most clear picture of saying, like, look, these bricklayers, they all decided how many bricks per day is standard for them. And it seems arbitrary because when they're working for a city, it's this number. But when they're working for a private company, it's this number. And there's no reason it should be 100 bricks more or whatever. Like, he's like, if I assign them someone who arranges the bricks and gets their grout together and gets their this and then kind of works so all the bricklayer has to do is just lift up and put bricks on the wall, they can create way more square footage of wall in a day if I just assign them a helper. And then when I read that specific example, I was like, this needs to be a podcast, because I was like, this is exactly the Scrum Master's role. And I would imagine that a person trying to argue, why would I want to pay a bricklayer assistant? Bricklayer can mix mortar. The bricklayer can pick bricks up from the pile and bring them over to his little scaffolding to bring them up to, like, why do I need two people to do that?
You want to hire somebody else?
I got to hire somebody else? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, actually, no, it's not. And you don't know anything about how the work is done. So calm down and go back to your corner. That's basically scientific. Like I like summarize science. Skip to the end of this broadcast, where I'll tell you what scientific management means. It means telling business owners, like, sit down and go back to your corner. I know how best to do the work.
Right.
It's process engineering.
It really is. Yeah.
So because you're measuring everything and you look at
because you're measuring. You had exactly right. It's process engineering because you're measuring and you actually have data to back up what you're saying.
Exactly.
As opposed to what we like to go back to every time on the podcast is somebody from development being like, I know what to build next.
Yeah, I know best.
I guess
leave me alone. I'm going back to the basement.
It's not fair to
Go
point
clean up
out. It's
stuff.
not fair to point out development because executives love to do that too.
They
Like,
love it.
yeah,
They just
everybody is now an expert in everybody else's field.
That's true,
And they
yeah.
know how hard can it be.
Yeah.
How hard can it be to be an accountant
right.
or an executive, manage and play golf with the customers. And stuff.
Listen, if we're all judged by the if we're all judged by the least productive thing that we all do, like, yeah, how hard can it be to get coffee all day and
Do your taxes. Yeah.
do your taxes?
Yeah. One final thing I want to say is that scientific management, the idea was like the first thing of its kind, and it did not exist before. So it was something that would have had to evolve if they had been adopted in the country like it was, and it was on its way to being adopted, except the unions got in the way in some senses and management in other senses, just like you said. And Dartmouth was starting to hold media studies and stuff like that, and there was a book or paper written on a history and the critique of scientific management. So he goes into the things that are a problem. So a lot of times, a lot of the things is just reinvented the wheel because they were just people similarly observing and drawing conclusions from the observations to say we should be thinking about this scientifically and, managing things better. So a lot of things brought up.
Yeah, I kind of have a theory I'd like to dig into about like when the education system started picking this up and having it become a cornerstone of MBA programs and stuff like that. Like I read a fair bit about that, but I feel I didn't want to bring all of that color into this.
Oh, that's the podcast. On its own.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of this was quickly baked into management theory in the school system in this paper came out in 1913, so 1915 probably took them 2 years to absorb it on for probably many years. And then did they get it right when they were teaching it? Or did they start taking all of the little theories that we were talking about, like, oh, you can get quadruple productivity out of your people, but you only have to pay them 60% more? Well, how about if you only pay them 20% more and you get 200% productivity? That's good enough, right? I could easily see the most evil take on this.
You absolutely nailed it. As one who's gone through this whole mill of an MBA program, I can tell you, there is no mention in there about effectivity. It's all about efficiency.
Yeah.
Right? ROI, ROCE, all these measures that you use in accounting, and that unfortunately manifests itself as do as much as you can with as little as you can. And if you have stuff pending because the product wasn't quite right, that's okay. There'll be another budget next year. That's the problem.
That's the key to the problem, because they're not looking at what the end result is and customer satisfaction and how it's going to turn out, and making the production system meet that demand or desire so that they get maximum dollar for the value that they're producing. So Taylor talks about how the workers try to do the soldiering.
Soldiering.
So this is management's version of soldiering. How do we do the least amount of work? When you do the management, because I'm interested in that, because the mindset that management has is just make it better and faster, and let's get the product out there, and so I can sell and make mine hit my numbers so that I look good. So it's exactly the same thing that Taylor is criticizing for the manual labor, but being done by management.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, we'll get to that in the Deming podcast. I don't want to muddy the waters with here because, and also, I feel I want to have somebody on who can talk about OKRs from an actual informed sense of the word, OKRs, because I absolutely despise OKRs because exactly this. They're like, oh, I need to increase my production line by 10% more than it was last year. Like, oh, really? You want to increase more production, but you don't care about how many items are discarded as waste or how many items come back as defects. Cool, we can do that. And then the defects go up 50% from what they were last year. But that wasn't your OKR. Your OKR wasn't keep defects at whatever. Like, okay,
that's a huge issue, right? Because you're right. The OKRs are very insular.
Yeah.
And they need to be tied to the business objectives, right? Which is increase customer satisfaction by X. You're not going to do that if you have that defect rate.
Right.
So you ultimately get what you're measuring. That's really the problem with OKRs, right?
Right. That's a huge gap in the Taylor body of work. And again, this is kind of goes into another podcast I want to do, another podcast I want to do with the gripe of the certification mill of like once an industry picks something up, like for the purpose of this, we're talking about like an MBA industry dealing with producing professional managers, because Taylor just outlined like 6 or 7 professional management spots. The timekeeper, the disciplinarian, whatever. Those are professional those guys, girls, whatever, have never worked in the job that they're doing professionally in their life.
Right.
But they're of the educated class, and now they're coming. So there's a lot of after effects that are not felt until many, many other different types of management theories down the line. But this is the first one. So I really wanted to tackle this one because everything else kind of builds on this one.
That's right. Yeah.
You know?
Or models itself. Or
models. Or models. There are other things that model themselves very heavily on this. Gantt. Can we all agree at least that Gantt is a real villain?
We thought Taylor was, so we didn't land there.
No,
so maybe Gantt's the next guy.
Gantt is like, you know what? All this stuff is cool, but I don't think we've tracked people's time closely enough.
Right.
That's the problem.
Or the time they're committing, that we're going to commit them to.
Right.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
And we're going to hold them to at least 95% of, utilization. Right?
Yeah. All right, well, Taylorism. That's Taylorism in the bag. Can we retitle this Gantism? Gantism. It doesn't work at all. It just doesn't flow off the tongue. All right, so that was our series on Taylorism. I hope you enjoyed our podcast that required research.
Yeah, come back for more. We'll build on it.
Yeah,
the next podcast.
Well, I had to do Taylorism first and deal with this topic first, so that I can move on to other topics I wanted to get to. If I wanted to get into the Deming research and what he did with an entire national economy, I feel if he proved a concept, his method with an entire national economy, and it worked over the course of 30 plus years, he had to have done something right. So this podcast kind of leads into that one. I think that's probably, I needed to do this one first because this body of work appeared first historically. And I feel everything that was done after built on this. Even if it explored a different branch, it's somehow built on this. So I felt to do justice, I felt it was important to touch on this topic first.
Highly influential.
Yeah. And I kind of wish I had prepared a little something to say. The reason that this is influential is because all the MBAs are built off this, and all the business schools and stuff like that. It basically became their curriculum for, I don't know, minimum 50 years.
Oh, no.
Because Peter Drucker didn't come along until 54.
Right.
And Deming was basically ignored in North America until 1980. So like a solid 50 years. And this was your only management theory. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give us a like and subscribe. And if you didn't, just comment that
you would like to see.
That you would, what you would like to see. I was gonna say, don't comment.
But hey, it was worth every penny you didn't pay for. So come back again.
So true.
Thank you for staying the distance with us.